Once again, it is just such an honor for me to be here. And so funny, when I came in yesterday, I stopped at a little gas station, and I was like, man, this is the hottest I've ever been in my life. And they're looking at me like I am crazy. And I'm like, what? He said, this is not hot at all. This is fall weather right now. I said, if this is fall, I can't imagine what summer would be like here then. But I'm adapting, and it's been good just having the sunshine. I'm coming from Portland, Oregon, and so you can just imagine the weather difference and different things. When I left Portland, it was 57 degrees high. And so you can just understand the craziness of everything. Well, once again, I'm just thrilled that Chris invited me to be part of this and be part of this time to be able to spend with you. Now, I like to tell people that I'm living proof that God can use anything and anybody. If there's any way you wanted to sum my life up, and that would be it. And the older that I get, the more that I understand that things don't happen by accident. And so I truly believe in my heart that there are some of you here today that this message that I'm going to share, it was meant just for you. Now, as Chris has already said, that I was in the United States Air Force. And let me tell you how I got in the Air Force, is that after high school, I decided one thing I wanted to do, and that was to travel the world. Now, my problem was I didn't have money. So I'm thinking, now, how can I travel the world with no money? And then the bright idea came, the military. And so what better way to join the Air Force, because airplanes, you'll travel the world. Well, I ended up being stationed in Washington, D.C. my entire time. Never left D.C. So there went my bright ideal of traveling the world. But while in D.C., I had the privilege of being stationed with a unique group of people. It's usually a one-year special assignment, and it's called the President's Honor Guard at the White House. And so I had the privilege of serving 3 presidents. I'm an old man, I tell people. I was President Reagan, but his second term. Let me make sure you understand. It was his second term, and then I did President Bush, all of his one term, and then I did one term into President Bill Clinton. And then I shocked everyone, including myself. I really felt a passion to work with young people. And so I ended up resigning from the White House, the only person to ever do this, to become a youth counselor. And so I went back to school, went to school for the very first time in my life, actually age 26, and started the whole process of learning to work with young people. And so that's how I ended up eventually becoming a youth pastor and then a chaplain. So that's kind of how it went that way. Now, one of the questions people always ask me, Terry, what was it like working with the presidents? Because we're there 3 days out of a 7-day week. We're there at the White House doing something. In fact, if you saw me in my uniform, the thing that probably would stand out to you is that I have a .38 revolver on my side at all times. But let me tell you the secret. There's no bullets in it. They're more concerned that it looks nice and shiny than if it really works. Honor Guard, all we do is try to make the president look presidential. That's all we do. So there's this great big military guy next to him carrying his briefcase. And so that's all we do. The Secret Service are the ones, they do all the guarding and all that stuff. But I will say this, that how I end up being part of the Honor Guard is that they have to have 120 men and women at all times. And after Reagan's second inauguration, they were short, around 12 people. And so they started a whole process of trying to fulfill those positions. And it's interesting how they do it, because you go 50 at a time, and then what they do is they get 45 to quit. And the sergeants let you know day one that it won't mess up your record, but our job is to get 45 of you to quit, and then we're only going to take 5 of you. And so it's all psychological, crazy stuff, making your beds. It's just all stuff you can imagine that would go with doing that. But it was interesting that I made it through the first week. And after the first week, 7, 8 guys had already dropped out. So you know what, I'm going back to my base. This is crazy. The next week, another 10 guys, whatever the amount was, they dropped out. I'm still there. And so I'll never forget, the sergeant said, "Down, I'm going to give you all the number 1 rule. If you're lucky enough to be one of the 5, this is the number 1 rule of an honor guard. You're never allowed to speak to the President of the United States unless he speaks to you first. Because there'll be a lot of times you're going to be carrying his briefcase, even sometimes you'll have his notes, and the last thing he needs is an airman talking his ear off." Now, do you all understand that? Everyone nodded yes. And then I thought of something. So I raised my hand, and he says, "Johnsson, what don't you understand about that simple order?" I said, "Well, if the president does talk to us, well, could we ask him a question?" Asked him a question. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So I took that as a yes. And so I went out that next day and I got a 3x5 little card and a little golf pencil, and I would tuck it in my little uniform during practice, and as soon as we would have a break, I would take it out and write a question down. I would ask the president if he ever talked to me. We'll be in the lunch line, I would start thinking of another question. And it was so bad because all the guys started laughing. Look, Johnson's writing another one down, and sure enough. Within the first couple of days, I had already written down 17 questions. I would ask the President of the United States if he ever talked to me, if I was lucky enough to be one of the 5. And that was just a running joke all throughout training. Well, I'll never forget, I made it to the 3rd week. And at the end of the 3rd week, the same sergeant said, there's going to be a fancy banquet down at a hotel, and we need someone to open up a door. And there's probably going to be a senator there or a congressperson. Where's that Johnsson at? He's always so talkative. And so I raised my hand and says, Johnsson, you think you can handle that? I said, yes, sir. So we go downtown D.C., and I have to be honest, it was the fanciest thing I have ever seen in my life. Evening dress, stars and stripes, and movie stars. It was absolutely unbelievable. And my job was very simple. They had a stage, and they had a podium, and there was kind of a see-through black curtain, and there was a door there. And all I had to do was to simply stand by the door, and someone in the far back would give me the signal. I would open up the door, let the congressperson, whoever walked by me, they would say their speech, and when they're done, they go back out the door and I close it. That's all I had to do. So I'm standing there, and I'm just looking at all the people. All of a sudden, a Secret Service agent walks by me, goes on the stage, takes the microphone, and says to the whole audience, I need your attention. At this time, we need to please evacuate the room. Ladies, take your purses, band, to simply sit your instruments down. Let's evacuate the room. So people started getting out of there as fast as they could get out of there. And then they brought in bomb-sniffing dogs. So I started to leave just like everybody else. He says, Airman, get over it back by that door. Don't you move. And I'm standing there, and these dogs are sniffing for bombs. I'm having a heart attack. By this time, I am physically shaking. I am so scared, like, Lord, how did I get into this? Well, after an hour or so, they started setting up metal detectors, just like at the airport, at all the entrances. I'm still standing by the door. Well, they finally give me the signal. People come back in, place fills up. They're sitting at their tables. They give me the signal. I open up the door. And instead of a congressperson or even a senator, Ronald Reagan steps out. I shouldn't have been near the president. They hadn't checked my background, anything. He had decided 1 hour before that he wanted to come and make a surprise visit because this is where he was shot at 4 years earlier. And so I'm there, the President of the United States is right in front of me, and I'm looking in shock. And he looks down at my name tag, and the funniest thing he says, Airman Johnsson, how are you doing today? My chance to talk to the President of the United States. 17 questions. And it was so bad, the color guard, those who to carry the flags, they're facing Reagan's back, and all I could see them whispering, that's that Johnsson guy. This is going to be good. So they're almost pressing up against Reagan's back. And I look at the president, and I simply said, President Ronald Reagan, how's your dog? I couldn't get my name out of my mouth. It got so bad that Reagan had sat there looking at my lips move. Then all of a sudden, Reagan just starts laughing. You're the funniest guy ever. You're so funny. And then Reagan thought I was making this up, trying to be funny. He goes on the stage, standing ovation. He's giving his comeback speech. I am not afraid. I'm right back where I started from. No one's going to mess with my agenda. And all I remember is that his hand is in the air. He glances over towards his hand. He sees me, and he stops in the middle of his talk and starts laughing. I'm so sorry. I can't look at that Johnsson over there. I am so sorry. I know this is supposed to be serious. I caused the President of the United States to mess up in his famous comeback speech. In fact, there's a video called Presidential Bloopers, and you'll see a much younger me. You'll see me making Reagan crack up during his speech. So how I'm still famous in D.C. is that when they train Secret Service and they train honor guards, they show them that video clip and say, this is why you're not allowed to talk to the president. True story. They still tell that story to this day. Well, what I'll be doing this week is, what I enjoy doing is to take a scripture of hope and let you know how that scripture was able to be used in my life. And so I'll be doing a little bit of storytelling, and And I'm just going to get right to our scripture that I want to share for us today. Our scripture today is taken from the book of Mark, chapter 10. It's verse 27. And it simply says this, "But Jesus looked at them and said, 'With man it is impossible, but not with God. For with God all things are possible.'" Now, friends, either this is true or it's not true. It didn't say that some things are possible. It didn't say that, well, maybe if it works a certain way, it's possible. But this verse lets us know that with God, all things are possible. And the hard part for us is that we can't see the beginning and the end. And what God asked us to do when we read this verse is one simple thing, and that is to trust him. And I know it's easier said than done. It's easy to trust him when everything is going good, the way we want. We could all say we trust God, we trust our higher power, God is great. But the true test comes when we have to trust him when we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I'm going to share a story with you about trusting God when you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, if you can imagine this, a little second grader, he's a big little fellow. Now, the only thing that's a little different with him, that when he was born, he weighed 12 pounds and 1 ounce, and his mother had him the natural way. That's right, his poor mother, you can imagine. Well, one of the things about this little fellow is that he was energetic. He loved to talk. He loved people. Now, he attended a very large elementary school, and what made it a large elementary school is that in order for the school district to save money, they closed down several little elementary schools, combined them together, and created what they called a mega elementary school. So in other words, it meant that the teacher went from teaching around 17 students to close to 47 students in her class. Can you just imagine that? All in order to save money. Well, this little fellow did great in the first grade because he was energetic and he became one of the class leaders. He could lead out. But when second grade came, there's a little bit more structure. And that's when things started to get a little difficult. Well, the teacher didn't know what to do with so many kids, so she decided that she would divide the group into 3 sections. The very first couple of desks would be for kids who could learn just like that. She could just tell them the assignment, they could almost teach themselves. Then the second few desks or whatever would be for kids that she would do her best to get to them and she would work with them. And then there was a third section, and those were for kids who were in their own world. Well, this little fella, the little big fella, he started off in the front row. Once again, he was talkative. He loved people. He was energetic. Now, one day the teacher was writing something on the chalkboard, and she turned around and simply said this, "I need someone up here to come up here, one of the students, and to show the rest of the kids how to write their ABCs. And I'm going to be working with some of the other kids, and I just want someone else to come up here and teach, and I'll get to the kids in the back." And so this little fellow sitting in the front row started thinking, please don't pick me, please don't pick me. And you know exactly what happens when you start thinking that. You come up here. And so the little kid comes up there and she gives him chalk. He writes his A, and when he wrote his B, all the kids started laughing. They thought he was trying to be funny. And when he wrote his C, they really started laughing. He was writing his letters backwards. All of a sudden, like a light bulb went off in the teacher's head. This makes sense. Every time he claims he left his homework at home, and every time there was a reading assignment out loud, he would have to go to the bathroom, and I'm trying to work with the rest of the kids, and he comes back 30 minutes later, and she discovered that the little fella could neither read nor write. He had been faking it. So she moved him to the second row, and that didn't work. She moved him to the third row. That didn't work. And finally, the only thing she felt she could do was to put him just out of the way in the back of the class. And so he sat in the back of the class, and she would bring in a coloring book every day. Now, to be honest with you, the little kid thought, whoa, this is great. I'm special. All I have to do is color, because all the rest of the kids would say, why can't I sit back there? And she would say, you just do your work. And so he thought he was special. And he would just color away and smile and color. Well, one day a teacher came in from another class to ask the teacher a question, and neither one of them realized that the little fellow was listening to their conversation. What I tell people, words are so powerful. Words can either uplift or they can destroy. Well, what the teacher said next the little fellow never forgot in over 40 years. You see, the visiting teacher said, well, what in the world? Why is he back there coloring? She says, well, he's a little mentally retarded. And so I'm just putting him back there in the end of the school year, just get him out, because I don't have time to fill out all that paperwork and all that stuff. And so, in fact, I just buy the coloring books and just let him do what he wants back there. And so when the little kid went around and asked what the word mentally retarded meant, the very next day she came with the coloring book, and instead of coloring, he took it and he ripped it and threw it at her. And from that moment on, all he would do is simply fold his arms and sit there. All class period. Finally, the teacher didn't know what else to do, so she called the school board, and they ended up calling the psychologist. And so the little fellow was assigned to a psychologist for 3 weeks. All different types of testing and ink pictures and all different things. And finally, at the end of the 3 weeks, the psychologist said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're one of the brightest kids. You're talkative. Man, you and that teacher probably just have a personality conflict and she can't teach you. You know what? Just simply say your ABC so I can write it down, and then I'll assign you another teacher. And so the little fellow said A, B, C, and then he froze. And the psychologist had to write a letter to the superintendent's office that eventually turned out to be a letter to that little fellow's mama. And normally I carry a copy of it to let people see with their own eyes. And it basically said, Terry L. Johnsson, that's me, is mentally incompetent. He will never be able to learn past the 3rd grade. Our suggestion is remove him from the school system, place him into McLaren, which is basically a detention center. Hopefully by the age of 18, he will learn a skill or a trade and be able to fit back into society. Signed, the superintendent of the city of Portland, Oregon. So friends, you have to understand this now. You have the teacher saying that this little fellow will never be able to learn. You have the psychologist saying, I tried the best that I can do. And now you have the highest school official in the entire state saying that we've reviewed everything and his situation is hopeless. And to be honest with you, that should have been the end of Terry Johnsson right there. Terry Johnsson should have been just another statistic. Except for one thing. Little Terry had a secret weapon. And let me tell you what that secret weapon was. A praying mother. A mother that believed that nothing is impossible with our God. There are many of you here today. You're only where you are, and I truly mean that with no disrespect, but you are where you are because someone prayed for you. That person could be resting in God, but someone prayed for you, a grandmother, a grandfather, maybe even someone at your church or synagogue that you didn't even realize every time you walked by them, you would be on their heart and they would pray for you. And many of us are living off those prayers right now. If it weren't for that, because there are people who could do our jobs better than us, blindfolded with their hands behind their back, they could do our jobs better than us. But God is honoring those prayers that went up for you a long time ago, and he has his blessings and safety over you. And I was definitely a product of those prayers. Well, Mom did something unique. Instead of giving up, like I said, I like to say she looked up. And what Mom did next, it shocked everyone. Instead of being discouraged, she simply goes and she gets a book. Now, many people think, well, she went and got the Bible. No, let me tell you, my mother, the book she went and got. She went and got the phone book. And what Mother did is that she opened up to the school section and she wrote every elementary school that she could find in the phone book out. Over 110 different schools. She was determined that she was going to get me into a normal school system. And it was so funny, I was speaking at a high school not that long ago, and I said that, Mom got out the phone book, and I noticed the kids kept looking at me. I said, phone book. And they were like, what? I said, you know what a phone book is, don't you? And they said, no, we don't. That's when you realize you've gotten old now. But they don't even know. Why wouldn't she just call Siri or Alexa? What? No. But anyway, but Mom got out the phone book, and she made this list up. And what I remember most about that summer is two things. Is that Mother would get on that phone all day long and call every school and she would just not stop until she got a hold of the principal. And then mom would explain the situation. My problem is my mom is so honest. The principals would ask her, well, why can't he go back to his old school? And mother would say, well, the superintendent said he can't learn, but I believe that with God, all things are possible, and God told me. And the principal would say, well, who said he can't learn? Well, the superintendent's office, but I don't believe. They said the superintendent of the school district. She said, yes, but they said, don't you understand that's my boss's boss's boss. And they would just hang the phone up on her. And mom would put a line through it and the next one. But the second thing I remembered about that summer is that every night, mother would pray over me. She would take her hand and place it on my head and pray, God, I know you have a plan for Terry. And she would quote these different verses that I shared with you this week, that, Lord, I just truly believe that nothing's impossible with you. And there are times where I can close my eyes, I can still hear her voice, her saying those promises to me over and over and over. Well, finally we got through the last list. Every single school said no. Mom was speaking with a neighbor, and a neighbor told her about a little Church of Christ, a little private school called Columbia Christian. And the neighbor said, my kids went there years ago. I don't know if the school is even there anymore. And so mother immediately got in the car, and she drove over there, and the principal happened to be there, and mom met with the principal. And it was so funny that years later, when I had the chance to interview the principal, he said, Terry, I did something with your mom in my 37 years in education I've never did before. And that is that if it's a private conversation, especially a sensitive matter, I always close the door. But I left that door open. And if I felt uncomfortable, I would call my secretary. And I looked at him and I said, you didn't leave that door open. I believe an angel left that door open. And let me tell you why I believe that. Well, the principal heard the whole story, and finally he said, you know, Mrs. Johnsson, I'm sorry, we're a small school. Our teachers double up in classes, and I can never ask the teacher to spend that much time with one student. But at least let me pray with you. And mother was so thankful that at least he took time to pray. And so they actually got on their knees there, and they started praying. And in the middle of their prayer, with that door being open, this teacher walks in to ask the principal a question, and she sees them praying, but the door's open, so she thinks it can't be that big a deal, so she just stands to the side. And when they were done praying, they got up, and my mom thanked the principal, for just at least taking time to listen. And so my mom walked out, and the teacher walked up to the principal and simply said, what grade would that little fella be in? He says, I don't know. If he didn't learn anything in second grade, he would have to do the second grade over again. She says, let me have him. He says, well, your class is already full. I got a good feeling about that little fella. He says, you don't even know him, Mrs. Sherlock. She says, let me have him for 6 months. If I can't teach him anything in 6 months, at least we can say we tried. And so I will never forget my very first day of class. Mrs. Sherlock's there, and she's writing something on the board. All of a sudden, you could hear a squeak, squeak, squeak. She turned around and said, who's making that noise in my class? And it was me. I had my desk, and I was dragging it to the corner. She ran over there and says, what do you think you're doing? I said, I'm sitting, I get to sit in the corner in the back, and I get to color too. She says, sit in the back and color. Well, not in my classroom. She picked up the desk, brought it to the front row, and says, you're going to sit right here. I thought, I like this lady. Whoa, I love her. She gave the rest of the kids their assignments, and then she came back with her chair, and all she had was her Bible, and says, all right, we're going to work on your reading. All I'm asking you to do right now is tell me, what does a letter look like? Does it look like an O like an orange, or S like a spaghetti? Just tell me, what does it look like? And I looked at her and said, I can't read. She says, what did you just say? I said, I can't read. She says, do you believe that with God all things are possible? I said, yeah, I guess that's what my mother says. Well, I better never hear the word can't, don't, quit, give up. If I hear any of those words out of your mouth without you trying, you're going to get it. Now I'm just asking you to tell me, what does a letter look like? And once again, I said, I can't. She says, wait right here, I have the cure. Now I'm thinking she's coming back with some glasses, a magnifying glass. I'm going to love this lady. Well, she came back and she didn't have glasses or a magnifying glass. Instead, she had a 12-inch ruler. And some of us are old enough to remember what a 12-inch ruler meant in a teacher's hands. And as I said to the last group, I think some of these kids nowadays need a 12-inch ruler. But she set that ruler right next to the Bible and said, if you say one more negative word without trying, you're going to get it. And I'm thinking, surely she's not going to hit me. So I looked at her and I said, I told you I can't. She took that ruler and went pow right on my hand. And from that moment on, I thought she was the meanest lady in the world, and I hated her, to be honest with you. Every recess, the kids could play. I never forget, we had 30-minute recess breaks. And the kids could play for the whole 30 minutes. The first 15 minutes, I would be in the classroom with Mrs. Sherlock with her ruler and her Bible. After school, all the buses would line up and the kids could play on the playground and have fun. I would be in that classroom with a ruler and a Bible, day after day after day. Well, in 6 months, for the first time in my life, I read my very first sentence by myself at age 10 years old. It was interesting. In fact, let's fast forward in time a little bit. I had made the president's honor guard, and anyone, like I said, who carries a gun near the president, whether it's working or not, you have to take what we call a presidential psychological evaluation. It's just a 3-day fancy test to see if you're crazy or not. That's what it boils down to. And so you'll have Secret Service there, FBI, 30 of us in a group. And we had been there for our whole 3 days, and they had said everyone had passed. And so we're all high-fiving each other. We're excited. And then the instructor says this, except I would like to see one person, an Airman Terry Johnsson. And I remember one of the Secret Service agents walked by me and said, man, you must have cheated. They're going to get you. Now, I'm horrified now. I'm thinking I'm about to get arrested. And so I'm trying to think, what did I do? Did I lie on something? I'm just trying to think. So the whole room empties out. I go up to the instructor, and I'm physically shaking. She looks up and says, are you Airman Johnsson? I said, yes. She says, let me just shake your hand. I said, shake my hand? Okay. She says, we've called the reporters. Actually, ABC News is going to be here, NBC and CNN, so they're bringing their truck too. We're taking bets on you downstairs. Taking bets on me? Okay. She says, don't you know this is so exciting? I said, no, what? You're going to be one of the first handicapped people to work for Ronald Reagan. Handicapped. She says, you have dyslexia. Not only do you have dyslexia, you have one of the worst cases we've seen, but for some reason you're reading almost at a normal level. It's not making sense. So we're trying to figure out what theory they use. And she started naming this fancy stuff and eye patches and all. I said, man, I've never heard of any of that stuff. She says, well, how'd you learn to read? And when I said a Bible and a ruler, you should have seen that poor lady's face. And all I remember is she said, now you know we're going to do a background investigation on you. You just better tell us the truth right now. I said, ma'am, I'm just telling you. That's the only thing I can tell you. So they did my background investigation. In those days, it was $85,000. They sent FBI agents all over looking for stuff. And the funniest thing was they went to my high school and they met with the principal, and they can't tell the real reason they're there. They only can say, by order of the President of the United States, we need to see every file or record you have on Terry Johnsson. And they told me later on, the principal said, I knew he was going to get in trouble one day. I knew this was happening. I knew it. And so I was excited 3 months later when I was able to tell him the real reason why I was there. But friends, the most interesting thing in the world is that if you were to look at my White House record to this day, in my actual White House files, it says that the only thing we can trace Terry Johnsson learning to read was a teacher using a Bible in the 2nd grade. And so, friends, that's why I say that nothing's impossible with God. If my mother would have just taken this situation at face value and tried to do it herself and try to fix it herself, it would have been a whole complete different situation. Maybe there's someone here today, it's just between you and God, but maybe you're facing a challenge that seems impossible, that it doesn't make sense. It seems like the more you're doing, the worse it's getting. This is a time to depend upon God even more. And as my old Louisiana grandfather would say, you're either 3 places in life. Either you're going through something, you're coming out of something, or you're about to go into something. But the good news, no matter where you are in that situation, that God will always have your back. And he asked us to do one simple thing that I know it's very hard when things aren't going the way we think they should do. And that one thing is trust him. Trust him when he says that all things are possible. That I can make everything work out in the end if you just hang in there and believe in me. But the thing is, he's not going to force his way on us. It has to be us saying that we're willing to give it over to you, God. Willing to accept that you, God, you're bigger than my situation. And when you're able to say that you, God, are bigger than my situation, that's when you can hold fast to that verse. For with God, all things are possible. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Dear God, once again, as I said in the very beginning, that I don't believe my friends are here by accident today. You know exactly, Lord, the challenge that they might be facing, and whether it's a work challenge, a home challenge, it's that child. It may be so many different things. But the one thing we have in common, that is that you have our back, and you want us to go to you, even when we don't understand it. And so I pass that on to my friends. May they follow the example of my mother. Turn it over to you, and to believe that with you, all things are possible. In your name we pray. Amen. And let me tell you the most amazing thing of all. I went on to receive my doctorate degree. The same little boy that they said would never be able to read. Thank you all so much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.